The first warning did not sound like fear. It sounded like work, a crackle in my headphones, a hand moving across paper, a message from another ship, cold and ordinary, telling us there was ice ahead. I wrote it down. I passed it on. Then I went back to the key. That is the part people never understand. Disaster does not always enter the room screaming. Sometimes it comes as a sentence you have heard before. Ice reported. Position given. Proceed with caution. Outside my small wireless room, the Titanic kept moving through the night like a city that did not believe in endings. The lights stayed warm. The engines kept their deep, confident beat. Passengers were finishing cigars, folding dresses over chairs, laughing in corridors, sending last messages before sleep. Inside my headphones, the Atlantic was full of voices, but none of them sounded afraid. Not yet. I was a wireless operator, a Marconi man, not an officer, not a sailor with a wheel in his hands. I did not command the ship. I listened to the dark. That was my job. I sat with a receiver pressed to my ears and heard ships I could not see. I heard land stations beyond the horizon. I heard messages jump across black water as if distance had become something we could defeat. People called wireless a miracle. Most nights it felt like one. A man could stand in the middle of the ocean and send a few words to someone waiting in New York. A woman could tell her family she was well. A businessman could send instructions before he even reached land. Small words, expensive words, human words. They came to us folded on paper, written in careful hands. Tell them I am safe. Arriving Tuesday. Weather fine. Love to all. I sent them without thinking too much about them. That was before I learned how heavy ordinary words could become. That night, the work had been busy. Messages were backed up. The equipment had given us trouble earlier, and we were trying to catch up. So when another ice warning came through, it became one more thing in a long night of things. I heard it. I understood it. But understanding is not the same as believing. The sea outside was flat. The ship was bright. The carpets were dry. The cups did not shake on their saucers. Nothing about the Titanic felt fragile. That was the first lie. Not a lie spoken by a man. A lie spoken by light, steel, music, and size. A ship this big made your fear feel foolish. I remember taking off one side of the headphones for a moment. The room was warm. The equipment gave off heat. There was the smell of metal, paper, electricity, and tired hands. Then the headphones went back on. More static, more tapping, more little voices in the dark. The night went on. And then it changed. Not with a crash, that is what people imagine. A terrible sound, a blow that throws men from chairs, a scream of metal. But from where I sat, it was smaller than that. A faint shudder, a wrongness in the body, a pause in the ship's confidence. My hand stopped above the key. I listened. Not to the headphones this time, to the floor. All ships speak through the floor. The Titanic had spoken all week in one steady voice, deep, strong, certain. Now, something in that voice had changed. For a few seconds, nothing happened. That made it worse. The lights stayed on. The desk stayed level. The equipment kept glowing. The world still looked normal enough to deny. I told myself it was nothing. A change in speed, a roughness, a small correction. Men do this when fear first enters. We give it a smaller name and hope it accepts. Then the engines changed. The heartbeat of the ship altered. Footsteps moved faster outside the wireless room. Not running yet, not panic, but faster. More doors opened. More voices passed in the corridor. Someone's words came through the door, clipped and low. We had struck ice. For a moment, the sentence did not belong to reality. Struck ice. The ship had struck ice. I looked at the wall, at the desk, at my own hands. Everything was still there. That was the cruel beginning. The ship did not look like a dying thing. It looked offended, as if the ocean had touched something it had no right to touch. I waited for someone to say it was minor. I waited for an officer to come in and make the night small again. A delay, a precaution, a story passengers would tell at dinner in New York. Then the order came. Send the call. At once. The room became smaller. The air became hotter. The key under my fingers became the only thing in the world. I sat forward. I pressed the headphones tighter, and I began to call. CQD. CQD. Titanic, we have struck ice. Need immediate assistance. Again. CQD. Titanic calling. Come at once. The signal left the ship and went into the black Atlantic. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then an answer. Weak. Broken. There, a voice without a face, another operator somewhere in the night, hearing us. I wrote fast. I called again. We sent the position. We repeated the need. The ship had hit a berg. We required help. The words were calm. My hand was not. More replies came, some clear, some distant, some too far to save us. That was the first time I understood the terrible difference between being heard and being reached. Wireless could cross the sea in an instant. Ships could not. Outside, the Titanic began to wake up. You could hear it through the door. At first, confusion, then annoyance, then questions. Passengers came up from warm rooms into the cold, wrapped in coats over night clothes. Some laughed, some complained. Some wanted to know how long this would take. Some did not want to put on life belts because they looked foolish. That is how the impossible begins. Not with everyone screaming, with people trying to stay polite, with people believing the world will apologize and return to normal. I kept sending. The key snapped beneath my fingers. The sparks cracked. The headphones hissed. Titanic calling, need assistance, come at once. Then came the message that gave the room one breath of hope. Carpathia was coming. I remember the feeling of that word, coming. It sounded like a hand reaching through darkness. I wanted to believe it was enough. A ship was turning toward us. Men were awake on another deck. Engines were being pushed. Distance was being fought. For a moment, hope had a name. Carpathia, but hope can arrive too slowly. That is the kindest and cruelest truth of that night. Someone was coming. The sea was already here. The tilt became harder to ignore. A pencil rolled across the desk and struck the edge. A paper slid and stayed where it should not have stayed. I picked it up without thinking. It was not a distress message. It was from earlier, a passenger message. Ordinary, private, meant for someone far away. The kind of message I had sent all evening without feeling the weight of it. I do not remember every word now. I remember the confidence of it, the assumption inside it. Tomorrow. That little paper hurt, not because it said anything tragic, because it did not. It belonged to a world where people still expected replies. I set it down. It slid again. Outside, the boats were being lowered. That word moved through the ship like a cold draft. Boats. Some people still did not understand. I do not blame them. How do you believe a palace is sinking while the chandeliers are still shining? How do you believe death is near when a steward is still telling you to mind your step? How do you believe the sea is winning when the band is still somewhere in the night trying to keep human sound alive? I cannot swear what they played. Memory is not a machine. Fear breaks it. But I remember the wrongness of music. A civilized sound standing on a sloping deck. A small, brave thing that could not save anyone. Messages came in. Questions, distances, promises. We answered what we could. We called again. CQD, SOS, Titanic, sinking, come quickly. The letters changed, but the need did not. The new call was simpler. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. A pattern even fear could remember. I sent it into the dark and imagined it traveling over the water, passing above lifeboats, above ice, above the cold, black fields of the Atlantic. Sauce. Sauce. If sound could become rope, I would have pulled every passenger off that ship. But sound remained sound. It could warn. It could beg. It could reach. It could not lift a child into a boat. It could not make a far ship close. The room was no longer a room. It was the throat of the Titanic, and we were forcing the ship to speak while she still had power. The lights flickered. The equipment changed tone. The signal felt weaker. Or maybe I was weaker. I do not know. There are moments when the body becomes a machine because the mind cannot survive otherwise. Listen, write, send. Listen, write, send. Do not think about the water. Do not think about the boats. Do not think about how many people are still aboard. Do not think about the angle of the floor. Do not think about the door. Just send. A man appeared near us. His face was different from earlier faces. Earlier faces wanted answers. This face had already seen one. He said something about the boats, about leaving, about time. For a second, I hated him. Not because he was wrong, because he had brought the truth into the room. I looked at the key. I looked at the headphones. I looked at the small scrap of ordinary paper. The room had been my world. A chair, a desk, a receiver, a transmitter, a language of dots and dashes. Now that world was tilting toward the sea. The choice was not grand. People later make choices sound grand. They polish them. They carve them into statues. Inside the moment, a choice is just fear with a direction. Stay and send a little longer. Leave and maybe live. I sent again. Titanic calling, Titanic calling. We are sinking. The response was buried in static. I leaned in as if I could drag the sound closer with my ears. The power dipped. The room dimmed. For one terrible second, I thought the ship had gone silent. Then the signal returned, thin and wounded. I sent again. I do not know which call was the last one that mattered. That is what lives in me. Not the famous calls, not the ones people write down. The unknown one, the one that may have reached someone, or may have vanished into static halfway across the sea. At last, the room could not hold us. The angle had become too much. The ship was no longer beneath my feet in any honest way. She was a slope, a wall, a street breaking under moonlight. Leaving the wireless room felt like abandoning a person. I had spent the night making Titanic speak. Now I had to step away and let her voice die. Outside, the cold took my breath. It was not just cold, it was a force. It entered the lungs hard. The deck was full of shapes and motion, people moving, people waiting, people looking for someone. Names were called and swallowed by the wind. The lifeboats were out there, small dark shapes in a sea too large for them. Some were away from the ship. Some were still close. Some people watched them as if watching the last train leave a station. The Titanic rose above us, lit in places, dark in others. She no longer looked impossible. She looked wounded and still beautiful. That made it worse. A broken, beautiful thing is harder to accept than an ugly one. There were sounds everywhere. Steam roaring, metal straining, water moving below, voices breaking, then gaps. Sudden gaps where sound should have been. Fear is not only noise. Sometimes fear is the pause after a name is called, and no one answers. I will not dress the end in fine language. It was too large for that. The ship lifted. The deck became a climb. People held to rails, ropes, each other, anything that made the world feel solid for one more second. The sky was clear. The stars were sharp. That is one of the things I hated, the beauty of the sky, as if the heavens had decided not to look away. The ship groaned with a sound I had never heard from anything built by human hands. Not a crash, not a roar only, a deep, tearing complaint, like the world was being bent. Then the lights went. Not all at once in my memory. Memory makes darkness strange. Some lights failed. Some seemed to hold. Some vanished behind smoke and angle and fear. But I remember the feeling when light stopped being something we could trust. After that, there was the sea. People think disaster ends with the great moment. It does not. The great moment is only the door. What comes after is colder, wider, quieter. I remember the water as a shock beyond words. I remember trying to breathe and not knowing if my body would obey. I remember blackness around me and voices in it. I remember looking for the ship and finding absence. A city had been there, a floating world, Music, messages, warm rooms, white plates, polished wood, children asleep under blankets, men arguing over smoke, women fastening jewelry, stewards carrying tea, operators listening to the dark. All of it had occupied space. Then there was nothing where it had been, only water. The silence afterward was not empty. It was crowded with unfinished messages, crowded with names, crowded with the last ordinary things people had done because they believed ordinary life would continue. Somewhere in that silence, I understood that history was not a date. It was not a headline. It was not a number. It was the space beside you where someone had been. When rescue came, I did not feel saved at first. I felt removed, taken from one impossible world into another. Hands reached down, blankets came, faces leaned over us. Questions were asked, names were written, survivors were counted. The Carpathia had come. That mattered. I will always say it mattered. Men had heard us. They had turned their ship. They had driven through the night toward voices in distress. Wireless had worked, and still hundreds did not see morning. That sentence never leaves me. Wireless worked, and still hundreds did not see morning. In the days after, people wanted order. They wanted the story arranged. The warnings, the impact, the boats, the signals, the distance, the rules. They wanted the night to become something that could be understood. I understand why. If a disaster can be understood, maybe it can be controlled. If it can be controlled, maybe it will not happen again. There were changes after. There had to be. More attention to wireless, more attention to boats, more attention to warnings no one wanted to feel. But I did not carry the night as a regulation. I carried it as sound, the key striking under my fingers, the hiss in the headphones, the weak answers from far away, the music somewhere outside, the cold wind in the door, the moment the signal thinned, the moment the ship stopped speaking. Years later, quiet rooms were never quiet to me. Rain on glass became static. A clock became Morse. A train wheel became a distress call. Sometimes, just before sleep, I heard it again. CQD, SOS. Titanic calling. Titanic calling. Not loud. That was the worst part. Not loud. Close, as if the room were still around me, as if the desk were still tilting, as if the paper were still sliding away. People ask about the iceberg. I understand why. They want the thing that killed us to have a shape, a white wall, a monster in the dark, something they can point to and say, there, that is where history turned. But I barely remember the ice. What I remember is the trust before it, the warm lights, the ordinary messages, the belief that size meant safety, the belief that hearing a cry for help meant help could arrive in time, the belief that tomorrow was already waiting for us. That was what sank first, before the ship, before the lights, before the last signal. Our certainty went down. And after all these years, when people say Titanic, I do not first see the grand staircase. I do not see headlines. I do not see the iceberg. I hear a small metal key under my hand. I hear static. I hear a ship calling into the dark. And I hear the silence that answered too late.